Good evening and welcome to our January virtual MADIA meetup. I'm Bruce Latham, a member of the MADIA board, and I'll be introducing our presenter. But I first wanted to thank Brenda Trainer, who will be helping with the meeting. Brenda will be moderating the chat and live questions. Before we start the presentation, I wanted to tell you a little bit about MADIA. We're a 501c3 educational organization centered at the heart of San Gabriel Valley in Southern California. And our mission is to ensure the region's technical, scientific, and industrial workforce is connected and has the tools they need to be successful by providing educational programs on entrepreneurship, business finance and operations, and technology development and commercialization in settings which encourage networking and collaboration among members. Our next meeting will be virtual as well on February 16th, and our presenter will be Chris Dyer, who's the co-author of Remote Work, which discusses strategies for engaging the remote workforce. If you have any feedback on this program or ideas for future programs, please send your comments and suggestions to email@mediatech.org. Stay on the line after the presentation and grab your favorite beverage to join us for further networking. I'll now turn to introducing our presenter. Dr. Marie Rippon is a graduate of CSU Long Beach and went on to earn a PhD at the University of Southern California in genetic, molecular, and cell biology in 2015. Directly after that, after getting her PhD, she joined Lab Launch, Inc. as the facility director and eventually became CEO in 2017. Also in 2017, she was a recipient of the Biocomms Catalyst Award for significant contributions to the LA area life science community. She is now the COO of LL2 Inc., a provider of quality, affordable lab space for biotech entrepreneurs. So please welcome Dr. Rippon.
Thank you so much, Bruce. And hi, everyone. It's really fun to be here. It's great to see some familiar faces that I haven't seen in literally years, which is kind of crazy to think about. But let me go ahead and get started with my presentation. And I'm already thinking my presentation is going to itself explain a little bit of what was in the introduction, which I could understand being a little confusing because here you are to see Lab Launch, and as Bruce just said, I work for LL2. So that will be something to explain right now. So I titled my presentation, Becoming a For-Profit to Achieve Nonprofit Goals. And because we are no longer a nonprofit. So I'm going to tell you guys kind of the origin story of Lab Launch and how we got from, a small nonprofit that was, relatively struggling for a while to where we are today, which is a funded for-profit company with multiple sites in the LA region. So Lab Launch was started in hang on, whoops. I want to figure out how to make this bar get out of my way, but I don't know how. Oh, well. Lab Launch was started by Dr. Llewellyn Cox, who, after working for a couple of biotech startups in the LA area, found that they were all moving to San Francisco. And he asked them why, and they said, well, because there's no lab space here. And upon looking into it further, he found that, yeah, there were a few biotech incubators, Pasadena BioCollaborative, one of the main ones, but all of them were full. So he basically just took it upon himself to go and find some space that he could turn into a lab. So this is the space that he found, a building on Huntington Drive in Monrovia. This had been previously the warehouse and cold room space for Prolacta, a breast milk making company. And the building itself had been originally built as a laboratory for an optical implant company. So it had all of the necessary, infrastructure for it. But as you can see, it was very bare bones. And Llewellyn was going into this project really on his own for the most part. So it was definitely, there were some people early on who helped, but he did the painting, he put in the floors in the conference rooms himself, put in the lab benches himself. So this is, truly bootstrapped startup organization. So here's the laboratory side. So as you can see, it was a little bit more finished, but still, not a complete setup by any means. Luckily, things got going in 2015 and he was able to open the space, and then brought in, luckily, a bunch of furniture that was donated by a law office down in San Diego. Some of the benefits of being a nonprofit organization is you can receive donations. And got a few companies to come in to this, nice shiny lab space that he created. He found out, however, pretty quickly that as a sole startup founder, that he wasn't really able to go out and do a lot of the business development that he needed to when he was sitting here at lab launch all day waiting for packages to come in, because you have to make sure if a package comes in for a biotech company and it needs to go in the freezer, it has to go in the freezer. So he was hiring for a facility director in the summer of 2015, which is right around when I was finishing my dissertation at USC. So luckily I had met Llewellyn while I was at USC, and he was working at the School of Pharmacy at that point. And he kept putting on these events that were talking about entrepreneurship in biotech. And I always thought, okay, this guy seems to know everybody. He'll probably introduce me to someone someday who will give me a job. And lo and behold, he gave me a job himself. So I came in fresh out of school working as facility director. It was interesting because I was able to take a lot of the experience from being in a PhD laboratory with a fairly new professor running it, and take a lot of those really practical how to keep a lab up and running skills and apply those here. So kind of as it goes with a startup that doesn't have a ton of money, you award people nicer titles as opposed to raises in salary. So I went from facility director to VP of operations to COO of Lab Launch Inc. And then we got to the point, however, in late 2016, when we had a few companies. Those few companies were doing pretty well, but they really weren't coming in as quickly as we needed them to fill up the space. And this is back when the term biotech incubator was really not a well-known concept around LA. And so it's never a good position to be in when you are having to educate your customers on what exactly you're trying to sell them. And so, even the people that, were starting companies coming out of local universities, they didn't have really the understanding yet of this is how much lab space costs, for one. And, these are the things that you need. Because, as you can see, this is not a laboratory space that you would find in a university. It looks very different. The amenities that we have are a bit more, bare bones. So a lot of, people would come in and look at this and go, this doesn't seem like exactly what I need. So we really got to the point where we were struggling financially. We were a nonprofit, but because we didn't have, strong educational programs or any other kind of program that really lends itself well to grant writing, frankly, and neither Llewellyn nor I are grant writers. It was getting really, really difficult. And we actually made the decision around early 2017 that we had to cut costs somehow. And the only real way to cut costs was for actually for Llewellyn to step down as CEO. So that's how I became CEO of Lab Launch Inc. in 2017, and basically, kept the space running and really ran with some of the projects that Llewellyn had started already. And he was still involved, definitely, still president of the board, still happy to come in and help with anything that I needed. But so, for example, one of the here's the companies that we had at that time that were coming in around the 2016 2017 time. So you can see it looks pretty full, but it still was not full enough really to support the salaries of 2 people. Luckily, Llewellyn had made some connections over in the San Fernando Valley. So this is a space in Chatsworth called Toolbox LA, where we had a laboratory. So Toolbox was a co-working facility that catered to a bunch of different kinds of businesses. It had everything from basic office space to actually a full maker space, which was really fantastic. And then we had a 2,000 square foot lab kind of in the middle of all of the rest of the co-working facility. So we brought in a couple of companies to the space. This company, these guys, their company was called, what were they? They were Hush Cosmetics. So we actually found a number of cosmetic companies that required laboratory space over in Chatsworth. And so that worked out well for a little while. This was like their grand opening. So this is Mayor Eric Garcetti, who came in to take a look at the space, a local state senator at the time. So, things were going pretty well, but sadly, since then, during the pandemic, because the space was primarily a co-working facility, they weren't able to stay open. We couldn't support the entire, I think, 20,000 plus square feet from our little 2,000 square foot lab in the middle. So they unfortunately shut down. However, we also, around this time in 2018, were able to connect with Ken Beal, who had this idea that in Irvine, they really needed a biotech incubator because he and his family had been giving to UC Irvine for many years. And so he had a lot of connections with the faculty there. And the bio faculty, biology, chemistry faculty, a lot of them were saying, hey, we could really be doing a lot more in terms of entrepreneurship if we had access to a wet lab. But the university isn't building it. So Ken said, okay, then I'll build it. And so he reached out to a few different organizations and basically ended up chatting to me on the phone one day saying, hey, I'm a real estate guy, but I don't know anything about building a biotech laboratory. Can you guys help? And so starting in 2018, we started helping Ken create what is now University Lab Partners down in Irvine at UCI Research Park. It is a beautiful state-of-the-art facility. The last I saw in their newsletter, they have 33 companies in their space, and they're putting on programs right and left. Their companies are already doing great things that you see in the news sometimes. So that was a really fantastic learning experience for us too. Just finding out that not only are there companies that need space, but there's also people who recognize the need for lab space and have the interest to go create it for a specific community, but don't necessarily have the expertise needed to develop what's not just a traditional lab space, but a space that has to be shared by multiple entities. And, of course, you want to provide as much as you can for these companies, but without going completely overboard, because, even Ken Beal wants to recoup his investment at some point. So that was really a fantastic experience to understand kind of, what other area of the market that Lab Launch could be involved in. And around this time, when University Lab Partners was opening, which was at the beginning of 2020, our grand opening celebration was December of 2019. So they were just opening at the beginning of 2020. So to have now 33 companies is really fantastic. And around that time, we were actually getting quite a number of requests for from people who were interested in doing similar projects, saying, hey, we have this building, we hear biotech seems like it's a really cool thing. We'd love to have biotech in our area. Can you help us? And then of course, the pandemic happened and all of that came to a screeching halt. So I do want to tell you a really cool story though from the pandemic, because as a couple of you heard early on in the networking, Lab Launch, luckily, we did not actually have to shut down at any point during the pandemic. The way that our space is set up and the way that the local health department made the rules said that, essentially we were not required to shut down. All of our lab benches are already much more than 6 feet apart. All of our desks are actually at least 6 feet wide. So our space is naturally socially distanced. And so, partly because of that and because of, we just, I guess, I want to tell you this story, but also just that we really were very, very fortunate during the pandemic in general. And it's been a very interesting last couple of years because of that. So I want to tell you guys this story of Corva Labs. They were actually one of our very, very first members back in 2015 when the whole place was basically empty. Corva Labs came in, and what they do is anti-doping research. So their customers are big companies that all the companies that make things that athletes ingest. Basically, they all want to have all of their supplements and powders tested. So that's what Corva Labs does, is they do that testing. And so Corva was one of our very first customers. However, because our space is primarily shared, Corva, soon as they grew, they needed to become a CLIA certified lab. So only CLIA certified labs are allowed to process patient samples, because there's a lot of rules around patient confidentiality and tracking sample as it comes in to make sure samples aren't mixed up accidentally. So they needed private space, and we really couldn't give them private laboratory plus private office space. So they moved out and into a building in San Dimas. So once the pandemic hit, myself, Llewellyn, a bunch of the other people in the biotech community, all of us kind of started doing various projects related to the pandemic and kind of seeing, where we could help. Well, Llewellyn actually was contacted by the CEO of this company, Curative, because they had started up in San Francisco and they'd come up with a potential COVID-19 test, but they didn't have enough space. They couldn't find space. They thought Los Angeles was a much better option. And so Llewellyn actually connected Curative with Corva Labs, because Corva had space and was already a CLIA certified company. So they were able to work together, Curative and Corva. So actually the FDA emergency use authorized test that Curative was utilizing is actually called the Curative Corva test. So that's pretty cool. Oops, didn't mean to click that. And so, of course, because Curative got the initial contract with LA County and a bunch of other places in California, they were doing at one point something like a quarter of all of the COVID testing in California. So they grew really fast and basically took over the entire building that Corva was in. And so at that point, Corva couldn't do their work. Curative needed the space. So they bought Corva Labs. And so that actually became the first exit of any of our graduate companies, which was really exciting. So the two founders of Corva, they went and bought themselves new houses and Teslas, and immediately turned and founded two new companies. They founded Corva Scientific, which was basically doing the exact same thing that Corva Labs was, and Avrock Laboratories. Whoever sees the wordplay in that, post it in the chat and you'll get a virtual prize. But Corva Scientific was doing the testing for anti-doping, and Avrock, they were actually decided to, yes, John, you got it. And so Avrock decided that, they were looking at COVID testing and saying, PCR is a great method. However, it's pretty inefficient and we can't tell when new variants are appearing. You have to do sequencing in order to detect variants. And so they were actually a fairly early adopter of sequencing for doing sequencing for COVID testing rather than just PCR tests. So that was interesting because they had actually suggested it to Curative early on, and Curative said they didn't really want to do it. Well, now lo and behold, Curative is in our building down the hallway doing sequencing for COVID. So I just really wanted to share that story because it was really interesting. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Corva came back to us for a few months. So they were actually our first graduate company and our first two-time member. So that was, just a really exciting story. And they're a wonderful group. Whenever we have interns that we can't place within our companies at lab launch, I send them to Corva, and almost always they end up working there. So they're just a really great group. So that was really one of the big things that happened in 2020 for us was, just seeing this success for this company. We added some members. So we also kind of saw that biotech was obviously taking off in a big way due to the pandemic. Real estate was taking a nosedive, except for biotech real estate. So, Llewellyn and I decided at that point that, kind of the time was right to make the real transition from nonprofit to for-profit, because what we really needed to do at this point was not just provide incubator space, we needed to be able to provide graduation space, step-up space, because really all we were doing by providing incubator space is we solved a problem, but only for a little while. Okay, here's a space where you can have a lab bench or two. Oh, you grew beyond a lab bench or two. What do you do now? I don't know. There's nowhere else to go. So you were really just pushing the problem down the road. And so it really seemed like the right time to make the transition to becoming a for-profit company, since it was really difficult to try and get the capital that we needed through nonprofit means in order to really expand into, additional spaces. So we made the official transition from nonprofit to for-profit in October of 2020. And so the for-profit company's official name is LL2 Inc. because, we're super creative, LL2, kind of lab launch too. But we have the registered DBA is lab launch. So we're still lab launch. We're still utilizing that brand, and Lab Launch Inc. does still exist, by the way. We are looking at, the board of directors is looking at exactly what Lab Launch Inc. will continue to do. But for the moment, the focus, or at least mine, Llewellyn's focus is on LL2 Inc. So, click this. So we revamped our website, which was fantastic because this is now the second website I've built for Lab Launch. And we have expanded our offerings officially into not just providing laboratory space, but also lab operations, and that means we can manage and develop laboratory spaces for others. So if, say, someone with a building wants to build an incubator, we can help them develop that incubator, and then we can manage it for them. So basically this is, we don't want to take on new leases because that is much higher risk, but we are happy to do the management side of things. So that's really what that means. And this has actually worked out very well for us because we are opening lab launch at Atwater Crossing in hopefully Q2 of this year. It's under construction right now, and the design is for it to be step up space for companies that have outgrown incubators for the most part. So anywhere from, about 800 square feet to 3,100 square feet. And yeah, you can't see this very well on this picture, but we have a few suites that we've designed already, and that will be built in this. They're essentially a general laboratory setup that's suitable for mainly companies that are doing some kind of cell biology work. And we're also seeing a lot of demand from companies that are doing more chemistry focused work. So we're definitely looking at the remaining suites to develop those with more chemical focused companies in mind. And so we're going to be providing centralized services as well. So not quite to the same level as we do in an incubator, because kind of our ethos too is that we want to help the companies, but we don't want to do everything for them at any point along the way, just because once you're, when you're starting a company and then you're moving into a new space, that move in and of itself is a huge challenge. So ideally we want companies to have a good idea of all the things that they're going to eventually have to do. So we don't try to do too many things for them in such a way that they are not involved in any part of it. So things like we'll centralize services like bio waste removal, hazardous chemical removal, lab coat cleaning, things like that. We'll guide them on compliance, but we're not going to do compliance for them, etc. So we're definitely taking the kind of ethos that we have from Lab Launch as an incubator and applying it to the space in Atwater Village. So that has been really exciting. We've seen a lot of interest in the site, even though it is, the construction is really like very, I wouldn't say early days, because it's just the construction that needs to be done isn't going to take very long. But we've seen a lot of interest, just before opening, which, I think is really just a testament to how necessary this additional kind of step up space is for companies in LA. And we also have contracted with the city of Lancaster to build them a biotech incubator. They reached out to us before the pandemic, and we've continued our conversations with them. We're going to be utilizing some city-owned property, and this site is going to definitely be focused a little bit more on agricultural companies and companies that maybe need to do a little bit of biomanufacturing, companies that want to be in a place where their employees can probably afford to buy homes without having to make a crazy amount of money. So we're definitely looking at Lancaster as a really excellent site for certain kinds of companies and certain kinds of industries within biotech. And finally, the last thing that I really want to share with you guys that has been the most recent development is that we have developed a partnership with GAW Capital to develop biotech lab space in the LA region over the next 2 years. So we're also focusing with them on step up space for growing companies. The partnership itself is partly that they are our current investor, and as well as we are going to be developing lab space in their buildings over the next couple of years. So it's really exciting to work with them and to really have taken this, concept of, hey, we're a nonprofit biotech incubator working with startup companies and going, you know what, if we really want to solve the problem, we had to actually transition to become a for-profit company to have access to something like this partnership, where we're going to be able to now take the companies that are coming out of our incubator, are coming out of other incubators, and say, okay, you need to go from 5 people to 20 people. All right, you don't have to move out of Los Angeles. You can come to this building that we're developing right here. So this is so exciting and really a lot of fun. I think my favorite thing is actually working with the architects on lab design. Funny enough, who knew? But it's really going to be exciting. We just hired our facility manager for Atwater Village. And so I hope you guys are going to get to meet him soon. His first day is on Monday. His name's Alex. Super great guy. Came out of a research lab at UCLA, through a few really cool turns of events, ended up working at Trader Joe's. And you know what? If I was going to come up with a background of a person to run a biotech incubator, that might just be the best one I've heard, because you got to be so good at customer service and to know science. So we're really, really excited to work with him. And yeah, if you guys are interested in contacting Lab Launch, you can always reach team at Lab Launch. You get me, basically. So my email address I'll also put in the chat. And there's my email address, but team at Lab Launch is also me. So I would be happy to take any questions that you guys have. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. So that's quite a transition.
It really was. It sounds like it happened fast, but it did not. It did not happen fast at all. It was actually quite complicated. I'm guessing, Bruce, being a lawyer, you'd have some sense of how complicated it could have been. But
yeah, that was actually one of my questions, is what was the conversion process like? How do you pull, I'd say pull it off, but obviously it was done totally correctly. So, but to go from nonprofit to for-profit, obviously there are kind of things in place to keep people from taking advantage of that route if you had, but so you had to do it a certain way. So
yeah, we had to get all of Lab Launch Inc.'s lab equipment appraised and then purchase it for, basically the best price. And also just separating out, nobody who's involved with LL2 was able to do any of the voting. So that's really it. It's trying to keep keep as many potential conflicts from being conflicts. So
yeah, I think it probably does sound like if you just do it right, it's completely doable.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those situations of just pay the money for the good lawyers.
I support that.
Yeah.
Marie, there have been a number of other biotech spaces that have opened up, and I'm thinking of Cal State LA. I'm thinking of and have they? I don't know to what extent you think of them as competitors, or whether you think of them as sort of like they offer something different from what we have, and therefore we're just all in the same ecosystem and we can all coexist. Have the other biotech spaces done similarly as well as Lab Launch?
So there's a few different things. I think there's a few different parts to your question. Yeah. I'd say we are very non-competitive with each other. Chris Booster and I are actually part of the group of biotech incubators in LA County and the surrounding counties actually that meet roughly once a quarter, or have been. That's going to start up again soon, I think. But yeah, we meet and discuss, best practices, what our companies need. And, I've definitely, taken companies on tours of Lab Launch, found out what they needed and sent them to other incubators. So
Got it.
yeah, so there's definitely slightly different things that we all provide. Really just for the most part, being in just different parts of LA. That's a big one. I mean, Chris and I are both in Monrovia, but man, if I've got a company who is really interested in working with students, then I'm sending him to Chris.
Yeah.
Chris. Yeah, as far as, have other groups done similarly, I have not seen other LA incubators do, I haven't seen anyone else do the same nonprofit to for-profit transition, certainly. And I've not seen anyone actually start creating a graduate space around here. There's definitely groups have talked about it, and I think Biolabs is likely to be the next one.
Okay. Yeah. No, good. I'm really happy to hear how things have gone. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. I still remember that sandwich shop you introduced me to.
Well, yeah.
Memory.
The Tropicana sandwiches are the best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maria, do you currently have openings in your Lab Launch in Huntington Drive?
We do. All of our private labs are spoken for, but we have some lab benches available.
Okay.
I had a question about the motivation for going for profit. I'll just say it back to you. You tell me if I got it right. But it seems like your services that you had were not sufficient to maintain your operations. They were kind of shaky. And that finding funding to build out the services you thought were needed, you couldn't get that as a not-for-profit. So that was your primary motivation for going for profit, was the funding?
The funding, yeah. It was just, we couldn't keep enough personnel to be able to do the work needed to bring in companies. So yeah, it was definitely funding. It's like, if we want to do this, incubator thing, we either need to, go into debt, hiring a grant writer, take a complete turn in what we're actually doing and bring in something that's more amenable to nonprofit funding, or go for profit, which it's actually interesting. When we first started, there were a number of folks who said, why are you guys a nonprofit? They thought, you should be a for-profit company. You're just providing this service, which is space. Sounds kind of like almost real estate, even if it's a membership model. A lot of people thought we should be for-profit, and it's actually very interesting because so many incubators that are opening now are also nonprofit. That now we're weird because we went for-profit.
Well, it's sort of genius to be able to take your skill sets and apply them into the marketplace so that you can manage facilities and charge fees for that, so that you can keep yourself above water with your largesse, basically, of the spaces that you actually provide. So from that standpoint, I think it's really, you've split your services to dovetail into what you actually know about how to create a space. And I think, from Llewellyn's standpoint, being able to do the hands-on and being able to build it from the ground up was something that really taught him a lot of how to create a space.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of interesting because he did that hands-on, create a space, more bootstrap style initially, and then I was the one who worked with University Lab Partners, which was the as much money as you could want, basically, to put together a space. So now we've got kind of these two ends of the spectrum of lab space, and to have both of those, now we can kind of go, okay, what is this project? Where does this next project that we're doing fit in this spectrum? Because different markets and different customers are going to want different things.
So where's your headquarters now? Can we still say that it's in Monrovia, or is it elsewhere?
It is still in Monrovia. I'm still very much enjoying my 20-minute commute. I don't want that to change.
Good. So how does our area, I mean, I think sometimes like Lancaster and City of LA, and even Lab Launch when it first started, there's a little bit of government largesse that gets handed out to attract these spaces, to build out these spaces. So how big of an issue is that for the Medea area? Can we compete head to head when you have places like the City of Lancaster handing out checks? It may not be good public policy, it may not work, but if it does, they got the biotech spot and we didn't.
I think it's still to be seen how much of a challenge it will be to bring companies to Lancaster. I don't know that yet. I think in terms of our local area here, I mean, I can give you an example. So when we first started as a nonprofit, the city of Monrovia did give us a small amount of money, but it was less than had been initially suggested. So that also was how many years ago? So, I think since we haven't really been looking at spaces lately, I don't have as much current information. But that, I would say, is not the primary driver of whether or not companies are coming to the area. I think the primary driver is things like a lot of biotech companies, they want to be located where, well, for one, it's where their employees are now. Two, it's where their employees want to be living. It's also access to airports is actually kind of a big one. There's definitely companies that would really like to be over near LAX. It's just that it's way too expensive for them. But I think just feeling centrally located is pretty big. Public transit is actually another one that is fairly important to a number of biotech companies. So, those are kind of the things that we're hearing. Less so about, the types of, breaks that maybe cities can provide regarding taxes and such.
So how does Medea doing in the other pool? Do we have a lot of pull for bringing in these kind of companies, or is it, how do we stack up?
I think the best way to answer that is to say, we're looking at this space in Atwater Village and getting a bunch of interest before we've even opened. And we're actually not full yet in our space in Monrovia. So I think there's a lot of reasons why that could be, but we definitely have not put additional marketing dollars into Atwater Village. So I think that it is still a little bit farther east than some people think that they want to go. I don't think that that's necessarily true. I don't think that the area is necessarily too far east. It's just the perception that people have. The perception that people have that that's too far away. If I've got investors coming in, they're going to want to be, either near the airport or downtown. If I've got, if I need to hire people, they're going to be coming from, local universities. So, Pasadena's the farthest east that I want to go. I do think it's more of a perception issue than an actually factually difficult thing for companies.
Yeah.
Marie, do you have anybody in your lab launch right now that is sort of on the verge of needing to step up? And if they did and wanted to stay in Monrovia, what would they do? Go to Chris, I guess.
Yeah, maybe. I think the only company that we have one company that I can see them being the closest to it, but I think they're still probably 6 months to a year away. They've been kind of waffling back and forth on whether or not they want to, grow via raising another round or continue growing organically, because they've been very successful with bringing in grant money. I think where they would go, there's a couple of buildings that I think maybe have potential in Monrovia to be lab space. Otherwise, they might, there's Hatch in East LA. So they actually have one of our graduate companies. That was their first tenant for their project, Hatch Labs, over in East LA. And they're building Hatch X, which is directly next to that initial site. So I think folks might go to East LA, as we've seen one of our companies did. We actually had a company a few years ago move up the street from us into another building owned by our landlord, Samuelson and Fetter. So I think that is a benefit. Samuelson and Fetter, they do know laboratories, and so if they have space available, then we always ask them.
But what's the typical size of the next step up from you?
So it's pretty variable, but I would say between 2,000 and say 7,000 square feet. Usually it's, a company gets to about 8 to 10 people, and they're too big for us.
So is Zencourted there, or they left Monrovia, right? Or am I wrong about that? Did they go to?
Okay. I wasn't 100% sure if that was actually public, so now I know it's public.
Okay.
So they are in the process of leaving Monrovia. So that would be actually a space that's going to be too big for most companies coming directly out of an incubator. I believe they have, I want to say 48,000 square feet. So that's going to be too big for most companies directly out of an incubator. So that space, they're probably going to either find a company that is ready to grow, larger than that, or potentially split it up. But I know that there's companies elsewhere in LA who are completely desperate for space in the 10 to 30,000 square foot range. So if they're desperate enough, someone might just say, okay, we'll fork up the money for the full space and then maybe sublet a little bit of it. But I don't think that space is going to stay on the market for too long.
Right. So any technical questions? We've been asking a lot of business questions.
I don't know if I gave you guys too much technical stuff to ask about though either.
This has all been a business discussion, I think.
It has.
So how did your, I mentioned earlier, my daughter's going up to PhD school soon. So how did your learning, besides the actual science, how has is this like all brand, is the business side of it all new to you, or is it just kind of like it plugs in somehow?
A lot of the business side is new, but that's the fantastic thing about doing a PhD in the first place, is it teaches you to go learn whatever you need to learn. So, it's, hey, I need to be able to do this thing. I have no idea what the steps in between are, so I better go figure them out. So I think that was definitely applicable. Some other things that were very applicable were just, seeing how, what is human behavior and seeing how that functions in a laboratory setting. And in order to get the laboratory to run smoothly, what are the things that are the most helpful to do? Things like when you have a bunch of laboratory chores that need doing, if you just ask for volunteers, it's not the best way to go about it. Things like, if you really want something to be done consistently, nagging people isn't great. Make it easier. make it easier to do, make it more obvious, more convenient. So things like that were really beneficial to learn in graduate school. Because here's all these people that I'm not the boss of, but the professor told me that I need to make sure all the instruments are maintained and cleaned and such. So now it's applicable in that I can go to my clients and go, okay, they're my clients, my customers. So I'm definitely not the boss of them, but I still have to make sure that they help keep the space, clean and suitable for everybody else. So it's been a lot of the, I guess, softer side of things as opposed to directly the science aspect. But in terms of the science, knowing when someone says, hey, this particular instrument isn't working, I immediately understand how much of a problem that is. No one has to tell me, hey, the freezer keeps beeping and there's a puddle on the floor. Okay, that's time to freak out. Someone says, hey, the PCR machine doesn't want to heat up all the way. Okay, that's really annoying, but it's not time to freak out.
Right. Any other questions from anybody? Okay, well,
I have one, but the dogs are barking. Let me close the door.
They want to ask a question as well.
The husband is coming home, so the dogs are freaking out. It's been quiet up until the moment I wanted to ask something. What I am curious about is whether or not you, Marie, have become inspired as your own entrepreneur, and do you have plans sketched out somewhere in your head to start doing your own thing?
Oh gosh, I don't think there's any additional space in my head right now. But I tell you guys this story so calmly. You don't know what it was like, up until the last week of December. There was a lot of freaking out going on. And also, essentially, I've been running, at least handling like the board of directors and the legal side of the nonprofit at the same time as being the COO of the for-profit. So I think all the stress is still kind of leaking out my ears, and then we'll see.
yeah, I would say I congratulate you on becoming an entrepreneur, because that's effectively what has happened. You may not have started off with that.
Yeah.
You're most definitely an entrepreneur.
Oh, thank you. It is pretty awesome to be able to say that, yes, I actually started this company. Yeah, being the first employee is awesome, but there's definitely something to be said for having started it, and also, it's cool to own a big chunk of something.
Would your dissertation advisor be surprised?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. He's back in Poland now. I'm not sure. Maybe.
What was the focus of your dissertation?
It was embryology. I was studying a particular gene that we found is required for the full development of an embryo.
Okay.
I want to share experience I've had on both ends of this finding space. I was just counting up, and in our company's history, we've been in 9 different buildings, and every time you move, it's hard. And our labs are just electronics labs, which are easy compared to wet benches, but even so, it's hard. And so what you're doing for other companies, figuring out how to allow them to move. The other experience I've had from the landlord side, we rented space to a startup company called Silk. They were actually presented here for MADIA once, a photonics company. We rented them 1 office. A few months later, it was 4 offices. They outgrew that building, so we took them to another building, which they rented, 4 offices and 2 cubicles. And within a year and a half, they were renting 30 cubicles, and we had to convert our restroom into a lab space for them just to keep them there another couple of months. And then finally, they left us and went to a space that was like 6 or 7 times the space they had with us. So we saw their transition. But if you can take these startup companies and take them through at least the first one, I mean, that is just huge, I would think. So and for you to notice that what you were supplying wasn't quite enough, and to take that extra step, I really applaud that. So great work, Marie.
Thank you so much. And I definitely want to emphasize that I in no way can take, anywhere near all of the credit for this, because, in large part, this was all Llewellyn's like concept vision. He's the visionary. I'm the one that says, okay, hang on, we have to make this actually work. So, I definitely, I will pass on that message to him as well.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. Do you participate or are there opportunities for the company to co-invest either with sweat equity, so to speak, or direct equity in some of these companies, or is that
Not yet. It's definitely a concept we are toying around with, because Llewellyn is also currently a general partner of a biotech venture capital firm. He's definitely in a good position to make that kind of a next step in the process, but we don't have any current plans to do it.
Okay, any more questions? from
I'm
anyone?
wondering what Marie thinks MADIA can do for lab launch.
Oh, I mean, this is great, giving me a platform to talk about the company. I mean, really, I think, one of our next projects is to improve our marketing and outreach. So that is always like highly valuable to us. We've always, made our best connections by word of mouth. So, that's anytime you hear someone's talking about starting a biotech company, it's always useful for us to, have our name out there.
Right. Yeah, so we are, we've been kind of, it's because we watched first Silicon Beach come, it used to be Santa Monica, now it's Silicon Beach, Pasadena taking off. This organization exists to try to shine a light on the good stuff going on in this area. And so it's kind of if you bring somebody in to our neck of the woods, then that's great. If we can bring somebody to you or help them when they're here, that's what we're trying to do. And I know Citrus is it a bio, I know that Wendy Johnson has said that the different community colleges took a different piece of the biotech solution. And I think Citrus was more like the manufacturing side, if I'm correct. Is that still the case, or is it?
I know we have a biotech presence in the natural sciences. I don't know yet the particular focus. I'd want to follow up with your question.
And I do think that my sense in doing this for quite a few years now, we have a huge bio potential in this region. EV clean tech might be the second biggest, but not even as close. So I think if Citrus can add a lot of value, it's in the biotech area, because I think there's a lot of potential. It's already here, and thanks to Marie and Chris and City of Hope, and there's a lot of stuff here already, so we can just build on it.
Oh, and you know what I completely forgot to mention is that Corva Scientific and Avrock, where they ended up, is in Azusa.
Right.
So,
I mean,
still in the area.
right.
So
And that's
Marie,
why
at
we're-
one,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
at one point in time, Corva Labs had a program when they first came into lab launch, that actually was working on accrediting students to be able to run labs, or to manage labs, because you have to have certifications. I mean, if you don't have those certifications, you cannot run the lab. Now, that was something that was started by them when they were there. I don't know if that was ever pushed along or made formal.
I believe they were working with a local community college, or at least trying to. I'm not sure which college, but I know those were some discussions, and it was definitely involving, a formal educational institution to be able to provide that. So essentially they were building out, coursework, and they wanted to, bring that to a school. So I can definitely ask them if that happened or not.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's still a need for that in the area so that you can have labs that are being managed by people that actually understand what the ramifications are of this not being cleaned or that not being taken care of properly.
I imagine so. I know that when Curative was ramping up and having to hire people really quickly, I know that was difficult for them. So, however, I don't know how much maybe on the job training they have provided since then. And as maybe COVID defines, those people who are currently working, at Curative, at Fulgence, at those types of places, they might end up finding themselves on the job market again.
So is that the CLIA certification? that we're
CLIA
talking about?
certification and so clinical lab scientist is the title of someone who can work in a CLIA lab. There's some other stuff that the Corva guys were talking about, things like because they run, mass specs, and you have to have a good amount of training to do that. I think Chris can probably speak to this much better than I can, but there's not a lot of people out there, even scientist wise, who are really adept at running a mass spec. So that's definitely something that can be in demand in certain areas.
Okay, well, we'll officially come to a close, and thank you very much.
I do want to let you know that Greg has put into the chat that he's confirming that Citrus does offer certificate and degree programs in both biomanufacturing and biotech.
Okay, good.
Nice.
Okay.
Way to go, Citrus.
Yes, definitely. And build on that. That's kind of the goal. So thank you again, Marie. It was great and good to hear all the good things you're doing and to hear the other side. I knew you were converting. I just didn't know where it was going, and it sounds like it's going to a great place and continuing. So thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for having me. Thanks.
Thank you.
Very much.